let's get started. Once again, welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. Discover Churchill's polar bears this fall with expedition leader Annie Van Dinther. Annie, thank you so much for being here with us again on your typical Thursday time slot. I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Colby. I really appreciate that. And thank you to all of you who are tuning in. I'm so excited that we get to talk about Churchill and polar bears today. We have been waiting anxiously to figure out if we're going to be able to go to Manitoba and to Churchill and to Canada, and we are going to be able to go. So that is the most exciting news that I've had in a while, and I can't wait today to share information with you about why this is the best place to go see polar bears. Churchill is near and dear to my heart. I have been guiding there since 1999. I met my husband there. My son's name is Hudson. So there's a lot of family history, and it's just a place, I think it's my heart home is maybe the way to think about it. So let's dive right in. Where is Churchill? Where's Manitoba? And why would we want to go there to see polar bears? Manitoba is really kind of in the middle of Canada. And Churchill is about 600 miles, about 1,000 kilometers. Those are both rough numbers from Winnipeg. There's only a couple ways to get there. You can fly there or you can take the train. I suppose you could take a boat, but it would be a pretty long trip. There are no roads to Churchill, but don't worry, there's plenty of roads once we get there so we can go around exploring the area. So what we do is we fly into Winnipeg, we gather with our groups there, and then we take about a 2-hour flight north to Churchill. That number can change a little bit depending on the winds, but it's roughly that much. I measure how far north we are by whether or not the ponds are frozen. I watch them as we fly north, and I can't wait to get closer to where the polar bears are. Once we get in and land, we are in the subarctic. Now, depending on the season, there might not be snow when we start out, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Either way, you land and you know you are in a different place. Churchill is a small town. It's a port or a remote outpost, lots of different ways to think about it. This town is like the little town that doesn't give up. So much big heart here. There's only 900 residents now, but at one point it's estimated that there were 5,000 people there. I've even seen numbers that report up to 13,000. I usually pick the middle when the accurate answer isn't available. So somewhere around 7, 8, 9, 10,000 people at one point lived in this small remote outpost. It's about half Indigenous people, or First Nations as Indigenous people are called in Canada. And there's a lot to see in this little town besides polar bears. We always make a trip at the Eskimo Museum or the Inukshuk Museum. The name was changed in the past few years to be a more respectful name that honors what is going on in that place. And I love it. It means things from the past. Very appropriate name. This here is Lorraine. She's a good friend of ours. She wrote the guidebook to Churchill. It's a phenomenal book that I hope you get to look at if you do visit that place. I promise your guide will have one in hand. And then there's the Inukshuk. This has become the welcome sign of Canada, but it certainly was a much more serious thing way back in the day. When hunters used to travel the land, they would build an Inukshuk, which literally means in the form of a human, and the Inukshuk would point the way on their hunting grounds. Imagine traveling for months in a place with no trees and no people. A large rock sculpture could be incredibly helpful when it comes to pointing your way home. It was also a cairn or a cache. So let's say you're going out on a long hunt. You might want to put frozen meat underneath the Inukshuk so that you know, even if that hunt isn't successful, you're going to have meat that helps you on your way home. So a very, very practical thing, this Inukshuk. But now, this one in Churchill, which is way bigger than the normal ones are, you can see this day and night, and it is a place we visited both times. It's a pretty special spot. There's other wildlife in Churchill besides the polar bear. I happen to be a very big fan of the Arctic hare. I love these guys. I can watch them out on the tundra for a long period of time, They can be incredibly subtle in the snow. You might go right by them because they are very much so designed to match their local terrain. So really incredible animals. If you're lucky, you might get to see northern lights during polar bear season. It doesn't happen every time. And the reason is that bay is making ice. Hudson Bay is literally forming ice when we are there in the fall, October to November, to see polar bears. That ice is critically important to the story of why we see bears there. But the formation of it usually means clouds. So if you really want to go see the northern lights, we highly recommend our northern lights season, which is in February and March. But every so often we get lucky even during polar bear season. So why else would you want to come to Churchill? And specifically, why would you want to come to Churchill with natural habitat? We have so many incredible differentiating factors, and one is this luxurious vehicle that you see here. Now, luxury and Arctic usually come together to bring a little different idea than we have. Say right now I'm in Seattle, a big city. Luxury might be something a little different here, right? In the Arctic, this Polar Rover holds a lot more people than we ever put in it. You can see here with this group that there's pretty much one person per bench. They've got space for their gear and, to kind of settle in for the day and enjoy the spot. Other companies are going to fill that rover to the brim, or they're going to fill another vehicle to the brim, and that's going to make for less than ideal seeing. So our small groups are a big reason why it's important. Also, our guides who are going to join you on this Polar Rover are phenomenal. So that is a very special thing, that you have your driver that's driving this Polar Rover, and you have your expert guide with you, helping to learn, just like I'm doing today, as you go along the way. I want to go back actually one picture here. This is what it can look like in the fall, but I gotta say this picture doesn't do it justice. And that's because when you don't have snow, you get a look at the most glorious tundra rug. Small subarctic and Arctic plants that end up making almost like a fall foliage kind of print on the tundra. It's so beautiful. And it's really incredible to see bears that way. Later, as we move through the season, we will end up moving through snow and on frozen ground. And that, of course, is, a more typical scene that people are maybe used to seeing in photos and that sort of thing. But I got to tell you, both are very, very special. Now, we are not the only creatures that are gathering at the shore of Hudson Bay. The polar bears are gathering right along the coast of Churchill, and they're doing it for a very certain reason. But let's first pull back a little bit and talk about the different polar bear populations. Try to understand exactly what it is that's so special about the Hudson Bay bears. There are 4 different countries that are responsible for managing polar bear populations. The US, which is Alaska, is the place where we see polar bears. There's Canada. 50% of the polar bears in the world are estimated to be in Canada's hands. 13 of the 19 subpopulations. Greenland, or you might say Denmark, and then Russia. These are the nations responsible for monitoring and taking care of the polar bear populations of the world. This map helps explain what's going on with these polar bears. Now, I want you to look at the colors. This is where the 19 different subpopulations are. And these colors are really important, especially the sort of orangish yellow color at the bottom that says data deficient. If you look around, you'll see that there's a lot of polar bear populations that we don't have enough data on. They're an incredibly hard animal to study. Think about having to head out there onto the maybe not so stable sea ice and gather data from these animals. There's really cool research on how to do it, but it's expensive and hard to accomplish. Churchill, you can take a train to it. You can take a plane to it. There's ways to get research resources to that area. So the Hudson Bay bears, they are one of the most studied populations of all of the other bears. Now, when we look at that map with those countries where we can see polar bears, there's one thing that all of those places have in common, and it's the ring seal. The ring seal is the favorite food of the polar bear. It's prolific. There are many of them in the Arctic, and they are found basically on the continental shelf of the Arctic Ocean, and they are polar bears' favorite food. Now, I've gone to see polar bears in quite a few places. Feel really lucky that that's part of my job. I've been to Kaktovik in Alaska. Really beautiful place to see polar bears. You've got some mountains there. However, I have to say, when you go see the polar bears there, you're likely to see them in this boat. And it's not as comfortable as that rover. Really awesome, and I think everyone should go see polar bears where they live all over the world, but definitely it's more comfortable in that rover. I've also been to Svalbard or Svalbard. I can never say the word, guys. I'm going to stick with Spitsbergen for now. I've been there to see polar bears as well. Incredible. And again, if you're someone who's going to go see polar bears in multiple places, totally recommend these spots. But they just aren't the same, and they're not as intimate of an experience as when you go to Churchill. There's a reason that Manitoba, or Churchill, Manitoba, has been called the polar bear capital of the world. Thousands of people and about 900 to 1,000 bears all congregate in Churchill or around Churchill in the fall in order to be there on Hudson Bay for us to see the polar bears, and for the polar bears, they're waiting for an access to food. We spend our time looking for them, and we're waiting sometimes just like they are on the shores. They have a way about them that you can tell, even if you're not a scientist, that they're waiting. There's an energy in the air. They're clearly, I guess, almost like a group of people waiting to get into a restaurant. You know, the people waiting to get into the restaurant are different than the ones that are in the restaurant. There's an energy to them, and we see that with the polar bears as well. They are on the shores of Hudson Bay. In this case, you can see this polar bear in the lower right side of the screen. I'll try to bring my pointer there. See, there's that polar bear. That polar bear is watching this polar bear who was lucky enough mid-season to actually hunt a seal. That is incredibly rare. We don't see it even every season. 2% of all polar bear hunts, even when there's ice, are successful. That number is a little bit depressing. Honestly, if I were a polar bear, I might choose some berries or something, because that's a hard statistic. Again, I kind of always estimate, let's say they're wrong about that and it's actually 5%, that's still a really low number. They have to get out on the ice for access to those seals. This is a picture of Waposk National Park, and you can go to the World Wildlife Fund website and watch where the bears are moving. This was taken from a blog from a few years ago, so this is not where the bears are right now. However, we are leaning towards fall, so I bet when you go to look on that, you might get a similar look. So why Hudson Bay? And why specifically Churchill? Why aren't we across the bay in another spot? Why aren't we in the lower part of the bay in Quebec? It's a great place to go for whales, but for the polar bears, we need to go to Churchill. So I want you to notice here, I'm going to use my pointer. This is Churchill, right in the little crook there. And this is called Cape Churchill. You see how it jets out into Hudson Bay. That's really important for why we have ice there. You also see, if you look over here, that there's an enormous amount of water, fresh water, that's moving towards Hudson Bay. That's the way the watershed goes. There's 3 major rivers right along here near Churchill. And you can also see that to the north and the west, you've got the Arctic that is right there near Churchill. So winds are going to come in from the Arctic across this area and blow down. So cold winds, fresh water, which freezes first, and then the currents in the bay go counterclockwise. So you've got water coming up to the Arctic, cooling down with that cold wind, fresh water meeting it here, and you end up with the place that freezes first on Hudson Bay. We're going to see if we can watch a little video of this. Here it is. Let's see if this works. This is the ice forming on Hudson Bay. Look for that little spot where Churchill is, that little crook. Here's Churchill. Watch where it freezes, all along here. There it goes. That's what happens first. The bears know that if they wait around the Churchill area, the ice is going to form in the fall near the winter, right? It's going to form there first, and that's going to give them access to those ring seals that we looked at before. The bears are going to probably be throughout the summer all along this coast, but they're going to slowly, with using the least amount of energy possible, move their way towards Churchill. Sometimes we go out on helicopter rides and we can see them waiting, especially out near Cape Churchill, which is an area where they can sometimes get seals, but also have access to ice quite fast. Now, because there are so many polar bears that gather near the town of Churchill, remember, almost the same amount of polar bears and people. It's thought that there's 900 to 100 polar bears, and there's about 900 people who live in Churchill. So it's a pretty equal population. That means that the town of Churchill has had to develop a way to deal with polar bears coming into their town, and they have a fantastic program. In fact, I would say that the Polar Bear Alert Program is one of the top reasons to choose Churchill as a place to view bears. They have their act together when it comes to this. There's constant monitoring of the town. There are traps that don't hurt the bears located around town. They have a bit of seal oil in them so that the trap smells like there's going to be food there. Again, these are only right around town. If a bear is to be trapped, or if polar bear alert officers find them and dart the bear, they will be brought to the polar bear. It's the polar bear jail. They call it the holding facility. I think it sounds a little more politically correct, but it's the polar bear jail. Now, when they are in the polar bear holding facility, they are not fed. And that's because they wouldn't be fed if they were just naturally hanging out in, say, the Churchill Wildlife Management Area. So there's no food for them there. We'd have more bears trying to get in to polar bear jail than get out. The idea is that they're going to hold the bears there for some period of time, depending on how many bears they have, and then they're going to fly them to different areas, depending on if they're male and female, so that hopefully they'll slowly walk back, and when the ice forms, they'll be ready to go. Sometimes we have repeat offenders. They end up staying in the holding facility the whole season, but that's more of a rare situation than the norm. Now, the Churchill Wildlife Management Area is about a 30-minute ride out of town, sometimes 40 minutes, depending on the conditions of the road. And that is where we go in those beautiful rovers to see the polar bears. The polar bears are often just as curious about us as we are about them. You can see this bear has clearly had its jaw broken, probably from fighting another bear. You can see that it's got a really tilted jaw there. One of the things about going with our expedition leaders is they're going to be experienced to show you those sort of things. They're going to know how to explain what it is you're looking at. For example, we have a bear that has a radio collar here. You can see the tag up in its ear, and that is going to have information about that bear. I shouldn't have said radio though, because it does not signal information, it holds information. When the bears go to jail, they'll get that tag, and they'll also get a tattoo on the inside of their lip. We see bears of all ages. We will see sometimes what we call coys, or cubs of the year, C-O-Y. These are smaller bears. They're adorable, and they're often playing with the kelp or playing with some willows, giving mom a hard time. They stay pretty close to her, but we do get a chance sometimes to see these bears. Now, it used to be that in the Hudson Bay population, polar bears were known for having triplets, but we have seen that number change as the time with the ice has grown shorter. Whatever kind of bear it is that you're looking at, it's going to be a phenomenal experience. Did you know that polar bears are not really white? If you look at the nose of this bear, you can see what I mean when I explain that the bear's skin is black. That probably helps keep their body warm. There's a lot of theories about it, but also that light colored fur is going to help with reflecting and absorbing the light. The bears, again, have that idea of waiting. You can tell that they're in no particular hurry to go anywhere, and they're often clowning around in the willows, getting a good back scratch or just checking out who else is around them. They do have to make sure that they're aware of the other bears that are near them. Often, we will see bears that will start to gather and group up. Group up is a strong word, but be near each other that are of the same age and the same gender. And this is a way of being safe. Some say that even as you go out east towards that point at Cape Churchill, you can literally see the bears growing larger in size. And that's because a large bear is going to probably want to be around a large bear, or even more, a small bear is not going to want to be around a large bear. This is a second ear cub. You can see the difference between the koi and this bear. The second ear cubs can start to look almost as big as mom, especially if you've got a male. Sometimes it can even be confusing. Sometimes we can know a bear throughout the season because of scarring that they have on their nose. And sometimes bears will end up hanging out with each other for a few days. They might spar, they might practice fight with one another. And this is going to be a way for them to get fit. So when the ice does come in, they've been using their muscles throughout that time. It's also going to be a way for them to know who's who in the bear world. For example, let's say these two guys were sparring with each other and one of them constantly won the battle. This is just play fighting, remember. But if I know when I'm play fighting someone that I'm going to get my butt kicked, I'm probably not going to go at that competitor, if you will, in a very direct manner. So later, when they might be fighting over a female, or they might be fighting over resources, a seal, something like that, maybe a whale kill, that's the time when, if they know they constantly lost, they're going to back off and let that more dominant bear do what they need to do. Sometimes during this season, we will start to see some stormy weather, and it can be one of my favorite times to look for and to watch bears. You can see that this bear is sniffing. It's difficult visuals, but this bear needs to know who is around him. He needs to understand if there's other bears coming near and if he needs to skedaddle or get out of the way. Having a close-up look at polar bears is one of the best things I think a human can experience in this world. And I personally love making images like this one that are really cropped in and show you the bear. The landscape ones, I gotta say, they're super fun as well. And I kind of go through different stages. Gone through the black and white stage where one season I shot only black and white bears, or this kind of phase where you like to really crop it in and see who the animal is. Either way, these are the kind of photos that many of our guests are looking to get when they do come to visit these incredible animals. Now remember that polar bears are actually sea bears, Ursus maritimus. So this little period of time that they spend on land, that's more odd than it is normal. However, with climate change, it's almost like they're the canary. They're the bear population that knows how to do this. And we have to see if those bears that are in Kaktovik that are now being forced onto the land with lack of sea ice, are those bears going to learn the same skills that the Hudson Bay bears have to make it through a period of time where there is no ice? That's yet for us to understand and see. The polar bears in Hudson Bay had thousands of years to adapt to the Hudson Bay melting. Of course, that area used to be completely covered in ice during the Ice Age. And as that ice retreated, the polar bears came in and they adapted to what they currently deal with. This is clearly from the black and white phase. I highly recommend, if you do get to join us this fall, to make beautiful images of polar bears, that you do spend some time shooting in black and white. It can just be an absolute treasure. For me, it breaks it down to the most simple kind of light factors, and I think it's an incredible way to capture the image of these bears. This would be also a koi, a cub of the year. You can see that it's pretty small, it's a bit dainty. The Hudson Bay bear cubs are going to stay with their mom for about 2.5 years, a little bit more sometimes. And that also is a shift. We used to see the Hudson Bay bears would be able to sort of kick their young out pretty early compared to the high Arctic bears. That was because of the abundant food source in Hudson Bay. But as that ice time has gotten shorter and the time without food has gotten longer, the females have adapted and they keep their cubs with them longer. Pretty incredible to see how they adapt to those changes. Another black and white bear. This one's a little bit fuzzy, but the posture of this bear was just so beautiful. And she was rooting in the ground and kind of like getting her snout in there. And so she was one of my favorites to spend some time watching. There is a difference between the male and the female bears, and a lot of it has to do with the head shape. A female bear has a pretty big round skull, and then a smaller skull, and so then a collar could actually stay on that bear, whereas a male is going to have a smaller skull with a big thick neck, and it's going to be more sort of sleek. It might have been a little bit confusing how I said that, so I hope I didn't make it too hard for you to understand. The long and short of it is, if you think about it this way, it might be more clear. If you needed to research polar bears and you put a big collar on them, which has been the standard for many years, if you put that big collar on a male, it would just fall right off because their head is going to be smaller than their neck. If you put it on a female, it's going to stay on because they have a little bit of a rounder skull there. Now, if you think about that, that means that a lot of the research that we have from over the years is kind of bent one way, right? We've been gathering collared bear research only on females. So I often look at polar bear studies and ask myself if something would change if we had gathered information on males as well. Just in the past few years, Andrew DeRoche has been able to come up with some very cool research and some tags that do transmit information. They're much smaller, much less invasive for the bear, and give us a lot of information on how the males are operating as well as the females. We do know that the males have a much larger kind of home range, if you will. They can go miles and miles north, whereas the females are more likely to stay a bit closer to the Churchill area. We'll be looking at incredible geology. We'll be waiting and hoping to see these beautiful bears, and we'll spend the day learning about them, their ecosystems, and their different populations. We'll work on things like photography and trying to capture these images from the place that we can. Some of my favorite images, as you can see, come from early season when there's no snow. I loved watching this bear, and I think he was watching us just about as much as we were watching him. So today I have kept it on the short side because I want to make sure that we can answer the questions that you might have about coming to Churchill this fall to see polar bears. It's just a few weeks away, and I think all of our polar bear guides are getting a bit antsy and are ready to get up there and get back to work. So with that, I will answer questions. I will tell you that we have a webinar coming up in a few weeks that's going to specifically address questions that you might have regarding testing or quarantine or anything of those sorts of specific details. Right now, what I know is that vaccinated guests can get into Canada, and from there, we'll be having an amazing team of people work out the rest of the details and try to make it as easy for you as possible. With that, let's answer some questions.
Thanks, Andy. That was a great little survey of Churchill. I appreciate your enthusiasm. I can feel how excited you are to get back up there as well.
Can't wait.
I feel the same way, of course. Before we start the Q&A, I would like to remind everybody that you're welcome to submit your questions, if you have any, via the questions field in your control panel. And some folks, as always, are doing that. And so let's see, I've broken them up, Annie, here for you. We have some trip-related questions, some Churchill questions, and some bear questions. So why don't we start with the trip ones, and then we'll go into the polar bear questions. The classic question here for you. When's the best time to be there?
The best time to be there is during our polar bear season. We really have chosen the weeks that we go to see bears very carefully. We don't send you there during Northern Lights season, for example, in February and March, because you're not going to see bears during that time. They're all out on the ice. So that mid-October to mid-November time period, we've got about I think it's about a 5 or 6 week season in there. That is the best time to go see Churchill. So, and to go see the bears.
Yeah, I agree. Each week is a little bit different and offers something different. Could you speak to that a little bit? Because we do have some questions about, like, before there's snow, after there's snow, what will that experience be like? Let's maybe just say right at the beginning and right at the end of the season.
Sure. So during the beginning of the season, as I mentioned, there's this time when we've got it's fall foliage, but it's all in this sort of tundra rug. And for me, that's one of my favorite times to see polar bears. In fact, I don't have very many images of polar bears around my house, which might be surprising, but I do have one taken by our good friend Drew Hamilton, and it's not a bear in snow. And it's one of the reasons I loved the image the most, because it's got this orange rustic kind of color around it, cranberry and orange, and it's just an absolutely beautiful way to see them. You're going to be able to understand the botany of the area a little bit more during that time when there's no snow. Now, I have to preface this with, this is an adventure and a highly unpredictable place in terms of the weather because of that ice making. So I think Colby and I have both landed on the ground early season and there has been snow. We've also landed on the ground and we've had 3 weeks of, or 3 trips, I should say, of not having snow. So it can vary from year to year. Sometimes we'll see bears that have like purple patches on them during that time because they're kind of laying in some berries. It's kind of a bluish purple color. There's blueberries there. We also see them have sort of some reddish color on them. That's usually from the kelp. That can happen whether it's snowing or not. As you move towards the end of the season, you are more likely to get, of course, colder temperatures, and you're going to get that snow on the ground unless it's a complete anomaly of a year. And you're going to be able to sort of see that classic bear in snow, right? That's what a lot of people are interested in. I think there's value in all of them. And I would give this same answer even if I was talking with my family, that you kind of just have to choose which one is more interesting to you.
Yeah, very good. There really isn't a bad time of year. They're just a little bit different, aren't they? Each little bit. So every day, people are going out there on the Polar Rovers to look at bears. Can you tell us a little bit about that, Annie? How long are people spending on the rovers? What's the experience like on the rover?
Sure, that's a great question. So we have a few different itineraries, and I think that's one of the biggest things that people want to speak with their adventure specialist about, is making sure that they're lined up with the perfect itinerary for what they're hoping to get out of this experience. We do have some trips that go to the Tundra Lodge. The Tundra Lodge is a really unique facility that is out in the Churchill Wildlife Management Area. So when guests go there, they're going to stay overnight. They'll be on the tundra the whole time. It's a bit like glamping, it's not a 5-star hotel, but I will say it's a 5-star polar bear lodge because they're hard to come by. But it is, for people who don't want to say share bathrooms, there's shared bathrooms on the Tundra Lodge. If you just can absolutely not imagine doing that, then the trips that stay in town are going to be better for you. We've got 6- and 7-day itineraries that stay in town. Both are going to go spend 2 days out on the tundra, 2 full long days. You're going to head out there first thing after breakfast in the morning. I don't think you should take the bus ride for granted, because getting out there in that bus is also a way to see wildlife. It turns out the bears don't have some memo that says the Churchill Wildlife Management is here and this is where you watch polar bears. They're going to cross those boundaries. And so as you take that bus out, you might also get a chance to see fox or hare or even polar bears. The 7-day itinerary versus the 6-day itinerary has a full town and area tour. Sometimes I think that should be called go and explore the greater area, because we do spend some time in town, but we also spend some time looking for polar bears. So it can be a really special day. I personally love to spend that day looking for wildlife, and I think, Colby, you're probably the same on that. We also have our night rover. So on any of those, you're going to get time on a night rover, which can also be really special. If you're super, super, super lucky, this doesn't happen on every trip at all. You might get to see northern lights on your night rover, but you're going to have really a phenomenal dinner with your friends, whether it's an introduction to the wildlife management area and how to be in a rover, or sometimes it's a really great farewell party, depending on how your trip lays out. So all in all, I would say those 2 days for the trip, the town trips, you're going to end up spending really almost like from, I would say 8 to 4 roughly is the time that you're going to be out there on the rover and looking for bears.
Okay, very good. Annie, as you're speaking, there's a couple more trip questions that have come in, so I'm going to ask those, and then I know people also have a lot of bear questions, so then we'll switch gears into the bear questions. Several viewers are asking, they're considering the Tundra Lodge. Can you talk then about the Tundra Lodge for us?
I love the Tundra Lodge. If there is space still on the Tundra Lodge, go. It's amazing. Again, you need to be willing to share bathrooms. It's a little bit more like a camp experience. However, the beds are super comfortable. Sometimes you can feel the lodge going back and forth from the wind, but you can also see polar bears around the lodge. And so it really is, I would say, immersion into the Churchill Wildlife Management area. The town trips, I would say, are an immersion into the town and the culture. You still go see those polar bears during the day, but you're getting to see what it's like to live in this remote outpost. What does it look like in the grocery store? And, you know, what is it like just for the people who live there? So they're both very, very special. I can't pick one because actually I've been able to pick as a guide if I want to guide out on the Tundra Lodge and if I want to guide in town. And I like it that I've done both. In fact, I spent a few years out on the lodge, and then I said, it's time for me to come guide in town because I miss town. So there's always that, what do they call it, Colby, FOMO, fear of missing out. If you do one, there is a little choice you have to make, but both are very special. Are there any more like very specific questions about the Tundra Lodge, or did I answer that?
I think that was pretty good overall. I really like that you used the word immersion on the lodge. It's really out when you're out there, you know, at the lodge, you're essentially sort of camped out, for that lack of a better word. Of course, it's a lodge, but you're camped out on the tundra, and you know the animals are there. You see the sunsets and the sunrises, and you know it is a lot more about the wilderness experience and the wildlife experience versus the cultural aspects that you get in town. And I always tell people that if you're really interested in one or the other, then that can help make your decision, I think. Yeah. The other question we have lingering about, let's see, just about trips in general, that and inclusions. We have a question about the helicopter rides. So can you tell us about helicopter options and what might that excursion be like?
Sure, we do have one itinerary called the Ultimate, which is a 7-day town trip. That day I explained where you spend some time in town and exploring the greater area. On that trip, we include a helicopter ride to the denning sites of the polar bears. Barry, the second picture in this, you saw me kind of coming out of the dirt. That was a polar bear den. So you can actually go and walk on the area where the dens are. Polar bears have denning site fidelity, so they come back to the same denning area over and over and over again. And it's unique with these bears because they den in the peat, they den in the tundra muskeg and in the soil rather than just in the ice like the high Arctic bears. So it's a very unique experience to see the polar bear den. So that's a trip where the helicopter is included with the whole package. On the other trips, you have an option to go on a helicopter ride, and that can also be really cool. You go out for, I believe it's about an hour of airtime, and you know that photo that you saw with the bears, they look real small, kind of curled up on the coast there. You get to see that bird's eye view of what's going on. So it's a really cool kind of shift in perspective where, you know, you're getting to see them hopefully as close to eye, or like we see this bear in front of us here who's goofing off. That's happening in the rover. And as us guides are explaining, like we are here, what's going on in the Churchill Wildlife Management Area, I often have guests that will go up in the helicopter and they come back and say, I get it. Like I got that big view of it and can now see how the relationship between town and Cape Churchill and where the management area is, it kind of all starts to click. With that said, it is certainly not required as far as going to see polar bears. So if it's not something you enjoy doing, there's really cool options to partake in during that same time.
Okay, great. Let's switch over to Churchill itself. There's a lot of questions about Churchill, and I suspect if I just send you on your way, Annie, you'll probably be able to tell us most of what we want. Maybe I can seed you with a question to start. Can you walk around town unescorted from your guide, and then what's there to do there in town?
Sure. So let's just be real clear here. This is not a walking adventure. If you're looking for a hiking trip, check out Switzerland or some of our US national parks. But when it comes to Churchill, it's polar bear season, and there is an chance, I guess is a better word than opportunity, there's a chance that there will be bears in and around town. Typically what we say is if it's during the day, you can definitely walk from, say, your hotel to, you know, a gift shop or something like that. And in fact, I encourage it because it's a great way to get a feel for the town. At nighttime, please don't do that. We really ask that you stay with your group and your guide. And even though it seems silly sometimes to take a bus a quite short distance, it is much harder to patrol where the bears are at night. And it's critically important that we keep everyone safe. So for your own safety, I would say at nighttime, stick with your group and your guide. And during the day, go walk around and enjoy this small but very incredible town. In terms of other walking, we definitely don't want you to walk out of town. So if you're someone who needs to get that exercise every day, there's some really cool ways to do that in your room or doing some loops around town, but probably not something that you're going to be able to like go on a hike or something like that. Does that answer the question, Colby?
Yeah, I think so. That sounded great. So in Churchill, we know that it's sort of a basic utilitarian town, right? It's charming in a very authentic northern way, and that means we might not have luxury accommodations and luxury restaurants. And I mentioned that because a lot of folks have asked about the accommodations in the restaurants, so maybe you could touch on what those are like for us.
Sure. So the hotels in Churchill are clean, they're safe, they're comfortable, but they're probably not going to be written up in the top 5 luxury hotels of Canada or something like that, unless you define luxury the way that we do, which is the place that gets you the closest to the best wildlife. That's luxury, in my opinion. But if you're looking for, you know, I don't know, gold-plated lamps and that sort of thing, they're cool to see too. That's not what you're going to experience in Churchill. Clean, safe, people who will move mountains for you and help you if there's something that you need. But definitely more along, I would say more like a very nice, clean, safe motel is probably a good way to set expectations for that. It's not something that we hear people complaining about though, because once you get to Churchill, you realize, oh, okay, this is comfortable. I'm not camping, and this is how you see this incredible Arctic experience or subarctic experience.
All right, great. You mentioned the polar bear jail. Some folks had questions about that. So the bears go into jail. How do they get out of jail? And when does that happen?
Sure. So it happens throughout the season, depending on the bears that are in there, depending on how many there are in the holding facility. There's, I believe, 30 different cells. Correct me, Colby, if I'm off on that. But I'm pretty sure it's 30 different cells, and it can hold more bears than that because you could have moms and cubs in one of the cells. The polar bears, we can't go into polar bear jail. Now, sometimes during Northern Lights season, we'll get a chance to go look inside when there's no bears there, but they really are trying to limit the interaction between people and bears. We don't want to habituate these bears so that they just feel super comfortable being around people all the time. Once a bear has been in there for a period of time where they say, okay, we got to get this bear out. Like if they're super stressed in there, not all of them are. Some of them just go take a nap because they know they're waiting for the ice. Some of them are more stressed. They might pace or show signs that we know mean we got to get that bear out of there. Manitoba Resources pays very close attention to all of the bears that go into the holding facility, and they come up with the best plan to keep that animal safe. That's what I love about the Polar Bear Alert Program. It's focused on how to take care of the bears and the people, of course, but it's not just, oh, we saw a bear, let's shoot it because it's in our way, which unfortunately in some places, that's the way that people know how to be safe around bears. And it really isn't the most beneficial for people or the bears.
Great. How about the national park? Annie, is it possible to go into the Waposk National Park?
It is possible to go into Waposk National Park when you go on that denning flight. The Churchill Management Area is a section of Waposk National Park. And, I'm going to be doing webinars for the next few weeks on Churchill. And I think that would probably be a very good one for us to talk about the specifics of the history of the Churchill Wildlife Management Area and Waposk National Park. All of it was set aside to protect polar bears and to protect the denning area. So hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, I guess generally people aren't going in there because it's set aside as a protected place for the bears, but there are some special permit exceptions, and we have that during the Churchill season in the form of specific helicopter rides.
That was great, Colby. Thanks for that.
Yeah, yeah. We have a lot of questions coming up here, so I'm trying to recap and answer everybody's question at the same time. So thanks for that.
Yeah.
Let's see, where should we go next? Should we go to bears?
Let's go to bears. Let's do it.
Yeah. Could you talk a little bit about how many bears are around Hudson Bay and around Churchill again? And you mentioned subpopulations, and maybe you could differentiate that a little bit for us.
Sure. So there's 19 thought to be, I will say, remember how many of them are data deficient, thought to be 19 different subpopulations of polar bears. The world estimates are between 20 and 25,000 bears. But again, look at all those data deficient areas. We don't have great numbers there. The Hudson Bay population is one of 13 populations that are in Canada. Canada has over half of the polar bear population in the world in their management areas. In the Hudson Bay population, when I first started guiding, it was estimated that there were 1,700 bears in that population. Now the estimates are between 900 and 1,000. It's pretty tough because while I sometimes think I've had a long guiding career, it's only 20 years. That's not that long, really, when you're looking at the population of an animal. So getting to see that Hudson Bay population is really exciting, and it's really important for us to understand these animals and start to talk seriously about what we can do to ensure they have a long future.
Great. So now we understand that there are bears that are in different subpopulations, and those bears are maybe living the same life in a different place, or maybe their lives are a little bit different, right? Some folks have picked up on the idea of that the bears in the Hudson Bay come onto land for portions of the year, while other bears stay out on the sea ice and are more fully marine, for lack of a better word. Are they different subspecies? How does that work, and how do they know how to stay away from each other?
Wouldn't we love to know all of that? I love that question because it's fraught with questions that researchers are asking themselves. There needs to be some overflow between the populations in order for those populations to be genetically healthy. So we do think, remember that we're just starting to gather better information about the males, that the males do wander in and out of the different populations. So that's one thing, that's genetic health for that population. They do live different lives. Let's talk about the bears in Alaska that I went to go see in Kaktovik. Those bears are used to spending 15, 20 years ago, they were going to spend the whole year on the sea ice. Now, one key thing to remember is that sea ice is only beneficial for bears when it's annual ice and when it's above the continental shelf. You've probably seen photos with cliffs of ice that are in the middle of the Arctic Ocean. A polar bear can't feed off of seals on top of that, and there really wouldn't even be many seals under that ice because they can't breathe through that very thick cliff. So of the annual ice in a place like Kaktovik, the northern coast of Alaska, those bears now in the last, again, 10 to 15 years have had to start to make a choice in the summer months. In the summer, the ice starts to recede more and more. They have to decide, am I going to be a Kaktovik bear? Am I going to go on land to deal with this time of instability? Or am I going to take my bets on this unstable ice that might leave me swimming for great distances? There's a really cool study that's been happening the last few years that is specifically asking, why do some bears choose to go towards town? And why do some bears choose to go towards unstable ice? I think that's going to be a really interesting study to see, because essentially it's almost like, there's a difference in the time frame here, but it's almost like looking back in time when we imagine the ice retreating from Hudson Bay area during the Ice Age. So, 10,000 years ago, 8,000 years ago, we look at that ice retreating, and at some point, the polar bears of Hudson Bay had to establish this routine of the ice melting all the way. So they had to get good at what I call the iceless time, right? They had to become good at waiting. They had to become good at reducing their metabolism so they don't waste the food and the fat that they're carrying with them during that time. We're seeing the bears in areas like Kaktovik and other places around the world have to go through that adaptation. But I think the adaptation in Churchill probably took thousands of years. The adaptation that's happening here is happening within my guiding career or my children's lifetime. And that's a much faster time period to adapt to. They do live a different life. And I think that's an excellent question, one that researchers are probably clamoring to understand as we learn more about how bears are going to live in this new world of ours.
Annie, we have some more questions about the polar bear jail as well as local research. Maybe we can marry that together. Are the bears that end up in jail volunteering for research?
They do end up with some research. Now, what I want to be clear about is they're not thrust into an ecosystem where they're lab rats for the day. Again, we're going to get that information on their the tattoo on them, so we know if they're repeat offenders. They're going to be weighing the bears and getting a sense of the general health of that bear. I do think that they're researchers that they would give some permitting to if they had a great research question. But most of the polar bear researchers that we like to learn from and kind of watch, they spend their time out on the sea ice or in the Churchill Wildlife Management Area watching bears that way.
Okay, great. Well, we're nearing the top of the hour here, Annie. How about we call it for today, knowing, of course, remember everybody that there's a few more Churchill and bear-related presentations coming up in the next few weeks. How about some closing comments for now, Annie, to take us looking forward to the next presentation?
Sure, thank you, Colby, and thanks for helping out. It's always wonderful to have a variety of perspectives on these things. I really appreciate that. I will say, guys, if you have some pressing questions, send them to Colby right now, and I'll be happy to look at those questions. And as we work on the presentations for the next few weeks, I'll make sure that we include a more thorough answer to those. I think already today we've gotten some cool ideas. I think we need to talk a little bit more about the ice and what's going on with some of the other populations. I think it would be great to talk about some of the latest research that we have on polar bears, and maybe more just in general about the physiology of bears and what's going on with them as they wait for that ice to come in. I want to thank all of you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to get to talk about polar bears with you. Colby and I, when we chatted before we came on with you guys, we're just like, we can't wait to get there. We can't wait to see everybody. We can't wait to see the bears and our dear friends in Churchill who've had a long time waiting for tourism to come back. If you have any questions, call your adventure specialist and they will help you understand what is exactly the best trip for you. And Colby, thank you so much for your help and time. I really appreciate that. And we'll see you guys next week.
Yeah, of course, Annie, and thank you. I want to acknowledge just one more time. I know Annie mentioned it, everybody. I am seeing a lot of COVID-related questions, and I just wanted to reassure everyone that, of course, that is 100% on our radar. In fact, our operations team, that's mostly what they're spending their time on right now. And so in a few weeks, we'll have a more specific webinar that's geared towards answering the COVID questions once we know the answers to all those questions, and that will include coming into the country of Canada, not only from the US, but from other countries as well, what testing might look like for you, and then what our protocols might be like when we're up in Churchill on the various trips. So we do know that is of concern for you. It is a great concern for us as well, and we'll be getting to that for you as soon as we have more detailed information. So with that, thanks again, everyone, as always, for being here. We appreciate you tuning in with us. Join us again tomorrow for our final daily dose of the week. And you can check out this week's lineup along with registration links on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we'll have the replay available shortly on our website. And with that, I will conclude today's webinar. Thank you, Annie, and thank you, everybody, for being here.
Bye, guys. Thank you.